Hi, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces, some new names to NEMA. I'm Jennifer Wilson. I'm the Director of Programming and Advocacy with New England Museum Association, and I'm joined by my colleague Heather Riggs. We have a great presentation today, so I'm going to hand it right over to Doug Stark, who is one of our community of practice facilitators. So, Doug, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Jen and Heather. We're excited to be here today, and thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. I thought what we would do is I would give a little bit of an overview of this project, and then one of our contributors, Ed Jones, is going to talk about Frenchie Johnson, who was a rower in the 1870s and 1880s, and then Bob, my colleague and co-editor on the project, will talk about sort of black baseball and Boston's role in collegiate football, integrating on the national stage. If if people would like to put their, names in the chat or put questions in or things you'd like us to sort of address, we do that, uh, and then we'll open it up for some questions at the end. Okay, Jen, would you like to share? Okay, so about 5 years ago, Bob and I started to work on a project that looked at untold stories um, of Boston's black athletes. Jen, it is still loading, just so you know, but that's fine. Um, and there's generally a traditional narrative that exists about Boston's black athletes. So here are the first two books that Bob and I have edited. We have two more that are sort of in the works, and what these do is take sort of a larger perspective of Boston's black athletes. Next slide, please. There's a traditional narrative in Boston. On the one end, you have Pumpsie Green, who's on the left. He was Boston Red Sox first black baseball player, and he integrated the Boston Red Sox in 1959. And the Red Sox were the very last team to integrate um, Major League Baseball. It was done 12 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier and 3 years after he retired. And then on the other side of the spectrum is you have Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics, who during his 13-year career, not only did they win 11 championships, and he sort of redefined shot blocking and defensive rebounding, but also the Celtics were very sort of seen as very progressive as it came to integrating civil rights, social justice, social issues during the 1960s. And so Bob and I wanted to say, hey, there must be a different narrative, a counter narrative to this story, and how can we sort of find the middle lane that exists? Jen, would you like to go to the next slide? So these are sort of the brief overviews of the different volumes. Each one has a different theme and a take on these stories. The first, Boston's Black Athletes, came out last June. This is more biographical in nature, and it sets the athletes within the larger context of the city's freedom movement. The second book is much more interpretive and focuses on Boston's sports, Boston's black athletes within a community context. The third really discusses sort of public performance and space and memory. This book has a contract, and we're working on it now. And then the fourth volume really sort of talks about political and economic forces. And this is a book where we're still seeking a publisher for at this point. But you can see that it's sort of a large scale project in how we look at race and sports, and each volume has sort of a different take. Next slide, please. Okay, so just some overview of this. So we look at the period from the 1850s to the present. So we're looking at about 175 years of black athletes in Boston. We address men, women, amateur, high school, college, professional, and international. So it's very broad ranging. And the types of subjects or sports we cover are probably ones that we did not think we would find stories for, but there are stories. We have rowing, pedestrianism, which was competitive walking, which was very popular in the 1880s and 1890s. Physical education, basketball, hockey, football, baseball, obviously the big four. We have cycling, lacrosse, intercollegiate football, wrestling, cricket, boxing, rodeo, soccer, golf, tennis, track and field, bowling, media, stadiums, front office personnel, the impact of busing in the 1970s. And it was this past year was the 50th anniversary of desegregating the schools with the busing in Boston and commemoration. We have a multidisciplinary approach to this. Bob and I have found writers, historians, sociologists, academics, people with a broad range that are looking at race and sports, and in some instances have focused on Boston, and in other instances are sort of taking um, a more national perspective and then figuring out how to situate Boston within that. And the project focuses obviously on one city, and that's Boston, which, as many of you know, has had a troubled racial past. Bill Russell famously called it a flea market of racism. There are still some challenges, obviously, today. Obviously, the Red Sox still have to deal with the being the last team to integrate. Adam Jones of the Baltimore Orioles had a an incident. There was an incident with him at Fenway a number of years ago. But our overall approach is that this provides a much better and greater understanding to Boston's black athletes, also Boston as a whole, and race in the city. And these are stories that have always resided within the Black community in Boston. And we're just offering a platform to try to talk about these stories and to make them more widely known to a broader population. Um, so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to one of our contributors. Ed Jones is a retired attorney living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's a former club rower who learned the sport on Pittsburgh's Allegheny River, the same body of water where his subject, professional rower Frenchie Johnson, competed in a regatta and won a century earlier in 1879. Jones's research interest lies with chronicling the struggles and triumphs of lesser known African American sports figures. So, with that, I invite Ed to talk for a few minutes about Frenchie Johnson.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is just give a brief history of Frenchie Johnson's life. And I'd like to begin by reading a newspaper item from the Halifax, Nova Scotia Herald of August 16th, 1877. And it begins with the heading, Champion of the World. It will be seen by the dispatch from Portland, Maine, that Frenchie Johnson, a colored man belonging to Boston, is now the greatest oarsman in the world, having beaten Ross, Landers, and three others in a short 3-mile race. Now, perhaps champion of the world is a bit of a stretch, especially given the fact that Johnson never ventured beyond North America. But nevertheless, this newspaper item shows that as an oarsman, Johnson's flag was firmly planted on the professional rowing landscape in late 19th century America. And as an athlete, Johnson was a skilled and popular competitor. He lived an extraordinary life in extraordinary times. He had been enslaved in Virginia in the antebellum American South, and yet he rose to become a skilled and popular professional oarsman when rowing was America's most popular spectator sport. Johnson was a sculler, which meant he rowed in a long, narrow, lightweight boat called a racing shell that held a single rower who wielded an oar called a scull in each hand, hence single sculls rowing. His boat could be 28 feet long, 12 and a half inches wide where he sat, and weighed 31 pounds. As an indication of his popularity, he was dubbed by one source as Boston's favorite sculler. He would travel up and down the eastern seaboard competing for prize money in rowing races, or regattas as they were called. As an example of the amount of money involved, in 1880, Johnson competed in a 3-mile sculling race on Jacksonville's St. Johns River for a purse of $1,000, calculated to be worth over $30,000 in today's dollars. Not a bad payday in 1880 for a 25-minute row. Johnson had a reputation as an accomplished sculler throughout North America. For example, his arrival by steamship at Jacksonville from Boston in early December of 1879, when northern waters were choked with ice, elicited a newspaper notice worthy of an esteemed dignitary. The notice read, Jacksonville, Florida, December 6th. Frenchie Johnson, a celebrated oarsman, arrived a day or two since. Being a colored gentleman of considerable distinction as a sculler, he will attract some attention in this age when it is fashionable to deify muscle, and will divide the honors with Mr. Stoughton, ex-minister to Russia. He will have a fine opportunity on our splendid river to give an exhibition of his skill. That was from the Savannah Morning News, December 8th, 1879. So for a Black sports figure to receive such a glowing fanfare, I think demonstrates Johnson's stature in a post-Reconstruction America. Little was known about Johnson's early life as an enslaved young man, including exactly when and where in Virginia he was born, as there were conflicting documents and newspaper accounts. However, he was probably born around 1849 near Hampton, Virginia. He first appears in the historical record in 1867, 2 years after the end of the American Civil War and 4 years after the end of slavery. The record places him at Fort Monroe at Hampton, Virginia. Fort Monroe was a Union stronghold in the Confederate state of Virginia, and it's not known exactly when Johnson made his way to Fort Monroe. He very well could have arrived prior to the end of the war as an escaped slave seeking sanctuary at the fort. But by the end of the war, with so many ex-slaves concentrated in the South, the Freedmen's Bureau sought to relocate many of them to New England, where better opportunities might exist. In Johnson's case, on April 20th, 1867, he and other former enslaved individuals boarded a wooden-hulled steamer ship bound for Boston. The passenger list indicates that Johnson was 18 at the time. In 1872, Frenchie Johnson was living in Boston, but had not yet begun his professional rowing career. He was single and working as a laborer. For a brief period, he was married, but unfortunately the marriage didn't survive, and by 1880, he found himself single again, although his new occupation was listed in the 1880 census as oarsman. You may change the slide, please. Regarding these two photos of Johnson, there'll be two, one after another. With a bit of detective work, I was able to track them down just this past February. They reside at the Cornell University Division of Rare and Manuscript Collections, and I estimate they were taken sometime between 1877 and 1879. The photo that you're looking at in his rowing attire, you see why in 1879, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle noted that when Johnson appeared in his racing shell at the start of a race on the Genesee River at Charlotte, New York, his, quote, trim figure and well-bunched muscles were much admired, end quote. So apparently Johnson was seen as a bit of a hunk. The second photo shows a dapper Frenchie Johnson dressed to the nines and supports an observation in 1877 that Johnson conducted himself in, quote, a becoming and gentlemanly manner, end quote, proving that an oarsman and a gentleman is not a contradiction in terms. Johnson was also described as seemingly well educated, perhaps the result of attending one of the schools set up by the Freedmen's Bureau to help educate newly emancipated slaves, such as Johnson following the end of the American Civil War. Unfortunately, Johnson's professional rowing career lasted only about 5 years, having been cut short by the onset of tuberculosis. But being the consummate sportsman and sensing his rowing days were numbered, Johnson had taken up the sport of competitive target shooting, where he further displayed his athletic prowess. In the same way he had become a skilled oarsman, Johnson earned recognition as an expert marksman. By 1879, Johnson had begun to question the wisdom of continuing to row professionally, as the sport was becoming increasingly tainted by dishonesty, with fixed races and even sabotage of rowers. By the fall of 1880, Johnson had sold his boats and had given up racing, claiming the money just wasn't there. He continued competitive shooting, however. In 1882, Johnson was reported to be slowly dying from his lung ailment, and in a dispatch dated March 9th, 1883, the New York Clipper announced the death of Frenchie Johnson. He died in Jacksonville, where he had been sent for the milder climate by the Lynn, Massachusetts Sportsman's Club, of which he was a member. I estimate he was around 34 years old when he died, and his gravesite has yet to be located. While other Black athletes may have achieved a degree of prominence during this era, including 3 other Black professional scullers, none received the acclaim and adulation of Johnson. So let the nation acknowledge Frenchie A. Johnson as America's first Black sports star. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ed. That was terrific. Next, we will transition to Bob Cvornyek. As I mentioned earlier, he's my colleague and co-editor on this project. He is a sports history professor emeritus at Rhode Island College, and research has largely focused on Black baseball and most recently sort of intercollegiate football in the Massachusetts area. So, Bob?
Oh, thanks, Doug. If I can, just let me set the table with 2 quick comments. The first of which is, Doug and I sort of set out to try to, I guess, make more accessible stories that had been in the African American community for a long, long time. So when we talk about, sort of this counter narrative, that's really sort of at the heart of it. We didn't discover anything that hadn't been discovered. People, whether they existed in the newspapers or within communities, these are stories that have been around for a while, and stories of tremendous quality and courage. And the purpose, I think, really of the book, in addition to what Doug said earlier, was really to make sure that these stories had a broader audience. With regards to baseball, within the last several years, there's been a renewed interest in African American baseball, but almost exclusively in what we call the professional Negro leagues. So the Negro leagues or the Black leagues, which started in 1920 and then kind of ended around 1960. They've received a tremendous amount of scholarly attention. Some of us may remember that not long ago, the Baseball Hall of Fame inducted a number of African American athletes who played in these professional leagues, including the owner of the Newark Eagles, F.M. Manley, who's the first woman, right, to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So there's been a significant amount of interest in Black baseball. Boston, for the most part, has been left out of that conversation. Boston's been left out because they did not have a professional team. Boston had a semi-professional team called the Boston Color Giants, but that team really had professional quality players, in particular 2 players a catcher. If you're viewing the image that I'm viewing, on the extreme left, you'll see Berlin White. And then right in the very, very middle of this image, you see Will Jackman. Now, these were two incredible ball players who you will not hear of simply because they did not play on a professional black team. But these individuals were really the heart of the Boston Color Giants, a semi-professional team, but it was a traveling team. But this team played played at all levels. They did play against professional teams. They played against other semi-professional teams. So Boston, although it does not have the distinction of having a professional baseball team, really had an incredibly good semi-professional team that traveled up and down the East Coast in the Boston Colored Giants with, as I said, two remarkable players. If you look at the image in the back row, if you go all the way to the right, the second person in, I'll be talking a little bit about Charlie Thomas in a minute or so, but not Thomas's role in baseball, but Thomas's role in integrating or helping integrating intercollegiate football. The Boston Colored Giants probably are the most well-known black baseball team, but prior to that, in the 1920s, a team that we don't know all that much about, but a team that certainly rivals the Boston Colored Giants in terms of popularity, in terms of impact on community, in terms of all of the things that the Boston Colored Giants brought to Boston in the 30s and in the 40s. Was the Boston Tigers. And I'm sort of in the middle now of trying to piece together a little bit more on that team, because my understanding in terms of that team's impact on the sort of racial identity within Boston, that team plays an exceptional role. So even though Boston is left out of the conversation, it's important to note that Boston had incredible teams with incredible players that were the showpieces of the communities that supported them. And part of what Doug and I try to do is we try to take a look at not just the teams, but the communities that supported these teams. How were they nurtured? How were they supported? And the Boston Colored Giants and the Tigers are two good examples of that. We can probably go to the next slide. That's Mabry Counts, or Mabe Counts, who was the major sports writer for Black sports in Boston. He wrote for two newspapers, the Boston Guardian, which was Monroe Trotter's paper, which was a heavily political paper, and gave some space to sports, but not a whole lot. The paper that Counts writes for, which is what I would call the solidly working class African American newspaper, is the Boston Chronicle, which had a tremendous entertainment page, which included sports, but also included music and theater and all of that. And Counts was one of two exceptional sports writers for the Boston Chronicle. The other was William Sheep Jackson, and actually Jackson probably does more on local Black sports. Counts was somebody who was also dealing with national Black sports, but Counts also dealt with Boston Black sports. Eventually would write a book on Black sports in Boston. But he and William Sheep Jackson are the ones who just tell the stories. This is history in the making. This is the first drafts of history. All of those sayings that accompany sort of sports writers, and Counts and Sheep Jackson. Their stories in many ways comprise a good deal of the research that I did for my piece on Black baseball. They covered Black baseball from 1932 until 1959 in the Chronicle, extensive coverage. But they also talked about the fans. They also talked about the players. I mean, William Sheep Jackson actually has columns in which he just devotes exclusively to one player, where this one player was born, where he went to high school, where he learned to play. So you really get I would say, an intimate sense of the ball players that played in Boston. And, we're all just so thankful for that. Not every city has that kind of coverage for its players. So when we take a look at it, or when I take a look at what's my first source, what's my first reliable source of information, it's always the African American newspapers, and Boston was really blessed with two incredible writers. So yeah, we can probably move to maybe we can hold off on Sam Jethro, because I know we're pretty tough on time, and Sam Jethro actually plays professional baseball. He's the first African American player for the Boston Braves. But let's keep the narrative with local or amateur or semi-professional folks, because I think that's really where the story is. I mean, that's the heart of the story for me anyway. It's not professional. So what I'm currently writing about or researching about is Boston's role, and it's a significant role, really, in the integration of collegiate football. And back in the day, Boston University had a very good football team, and Boston College, of course, had a very good football team. We're talking now about the years between 1939 and 1941. These are the years that I'm sort of focusing in on. And Lou Montgomery, who is a standout halfback for Boston College, is precluded from playing in games south of the Mason-Dixon line. He's also prevented from playing in certain bowl games because he's African American. And Lou Montgomery is this sort of tale of how segregation sort of has this terrible history within collegiate football. I am looking at a contemporary of Lou Montgomery, a guy named Charles Thomas, who plays during the exact same years that Lou Montgomery plays, but he plays for Boston University, and he is a significant figure in this story, and the fact that he actually plays in a game south of the Mason-Dixon line, and that's a fascinating story, and that's the story that I'm writing about now. So Charles Thomas, he's prevented from playing against teams in the South in 1939, and in 1940. But in 1941, he essentially breaks the color line in what I'll call the border state of Maryland. So before football is integrated in the Deep South, it has to get integrated in the border states, and Charles Thomas is the person that does that. Right up until game time, there's questions over whether or not Thomas is going to play. And then there's this interesting phone call that happens between the president of Boston University and the president of Western Maryland College. And as a result of that phone call, Charles Thomas is able to play, and it's a significant breakthrough. One of the things that's difficult sometimes for folks to understand is that there's no Jackie Robinson moment in the integration of collegiate football. It takes place over many, many, many decades. There's Black players on especially New England teams as early as the early part of the 20th century, and then there's this slow process of sort of integrating games, integrating conferences. The SEC is sort of the last to integrate in the early 70s. So it's a wide-ranging story, but if you take just a moment of a critical moment in which a border state desegregates in terms of intercollegiate football, Boston University is right in the middle of that, and Charles Thomas is right in the middle of that. So one of the things that's always interesting about this project is, as we collect stories and as we continue to do our research, these issues sort of naturally arise. And I was clearly taken by the fact that Boston University, plays a sort of critical role. Um, and I'll sort of end here because I know we have more to do, but I think the real lesson in terms of the Charles Thomas story is that the traditional narrative, getting back to traditional narratives, is that this phone call, sort of seals the deal, and Charles Thomas is able to play. But actually, it's the NAACP in Boston. It's actually a number of Boston College students who begin signing petitions, saying, "Hey, listen, there's something amiss here." But the critical thing, and the thing that I'm focusing in on my article, is the timing of all of this. He desegregates intercollegiate football in October of 41, just months before Pearl Harbor. And if you look at the petitions that the kids are circulating, and if you look at what the NAACP is saying, it's basically saying, hey, listen, World War II is on our doorstep, and we're here to fight authoritarianism, we're here to fight Nazism, and how can we do that when we're still segregating, players of color? So it's a sort of interesting story of how World War II plays a role, how student activism plays a role, and ultimately it all sort of results in a critical moment, I would argue, in the desegregation of intercollegiate football. Anyway, it's just an example of a story that, I don't want to say we've lost because it's always been there, but a story that needs to be told. And in its broadest context. And by that I mean the critical role that World War II plays in race and in race relations. And maybe we'll end it there.
Okay, thank you, Bob. We also have another one of our contributors on the Zoom with us, Catherine Leanne Harris, who's the founder and CEO of a company interpreting sports, which is looking to provide services to better interpret sports, a much more balanced humanity approach to sports interpretation. But for the purposes of this program, she wrote an afterword for one of the books that looks at commemoration. Her academic expertise is the role of commemoration. And while we tell these stories, or at least bring them to light, as Bob has referenced, a question is, are these athletes, are Boston's Black athletes, being commemorated in any way, or are they not being commemorated well enough within the city of Boston? Obviously, there's a Bill Russell statue at City Hall in Boston, but has there been enough to commemorate and memorialize these stories? And I should also say that Catherine painstakingly edited each one of the essays in these books. So we thank her for that. But at this point, I'd like just Catherine to share a few words about commemoration practices and how this relates to Boston's Black athletes.
Hey, thanks, Doug, and good to hear all of you present on this book and this work. It's really an important subject, not only for the city of Boston, but for the nation at large, thinking about this really big gap in the story of Black athletes in America. And the gap is there in large part because of the way the politics have played out in sports, and how really the agency that these athletes took ran really counter for a long time to the ideals that America thought that it was really upholding as a culture of freedom and victory. And these athletes were embodying something different and showing them something different, that they were having to push against that, the lack of opportunity that they were being given. But what we know about sports is that it's inherent to the human experience. Everybody plays. It's as common as eating is to the human experience. And so these athletes were not just playing, they were playing well, and in many cases better than their white counterparts, and not being given that recognition. And that goes on for a really long time. Most of the commemoration, Black athlete commemoration in Boston has popped up in the last 15 years. It's very recent. We really didn't see it, certainly not during the time that most of these athletes were playing. And the emergence of it has happened really as the social and political shifts have happened in and around the city and the state that have made some space for this to kind of come to the forefront, but not without a lot of questions about why did it take so long and why are there still so many gaps. So I would just do a quick rundown of what we do have. Let's see. So Worcester has erected the statue of Major Taylor in 2008 and opened the Major Taylor Museum in 2021. The Bill Russell statue was unveiled in Boston City Hall Plaza in 2013. That same year, Lawrence Finnison completed his successful campaign to install the Catherine Kitty Knox monument in Mount Auburn Cemetery. This is at the site of her previously unmarked grave. And in 2023, REI's Cambridge location opened the Kitty Knox Cycle Center. The Willie O'Ree Community Hockey Rink was dedicated in Austin in November 2018. And that same month, O'Ree was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. In 2018, the Red Sox changed the name of the famed street outside of their park's entrance from Yawkey Way back to Jersey Street, which was consciously separated them from the anti-Black legacy and the segregation policies of the team under the owner and president, Tom Yawkey. He led the organization from 1933 to 1977. I think it's worth noting that Mass General Hospital has not changed the name of the Yawkey Building, which is their cancer center. And I find this very interesting. You've got two really prominent locations in Boston who have taken a very different approach. And Mass General Hospital, if you go on their website and get to their Yawkey building description, they are supporting Yawkey. They're defending it, they're defending their choice, while still being very vocal about, the same things that the Red Sox discovered and decided to make a different decision. So commemoration is, as we know, very complicated. In July 2020, the Red Sox sponsored a Black Lives Matter mural on a very visible billboard alongside the Massachusetts Turnpike, which is adjacent to Fenway Park. They unveiled the sign in conjunction with the 61st anniversary of Elijah Pumpsie Green's debut as Red Sox first Black player in 1959, which made them the first to integrate the Major League Baseball. They also now have a Black Lives Matter sign inside the stadium that is permanent. The city of Malden dedicated their River Loop Park to Louise Stokes in September 2020. And basketball courts at Walker Playground in Roxbury, named after Medina Dixon, opened in August 2022. And Andrea's Pizza in Stoneham commissioned a graffiti art-styled mural of Bill Russell in 2022 as well. Two earlier acts of commemoration stand as exceptions to the lateness of these delayed recognitions, and those are Malden High School installed a statue of Louise Stokes in 1980, and Medford named their film festival after Mabry Doc Kunze in 1997. So we get those two kind of earlier ones. One of the more complicated commemoration stories is the Bill Russell statue, because he really didn't want a statue. He really wasn't sure he wanted it at all, in large part because of his complicated history with the city, and also because he just didn't really want to be in the limelight. He had sort of stepped out of the limelight by the time this statue comes into play. And he also didn't want it at TD Garden. This is one of the reasons why it's at Government Center and not right in front of TD Garden. He agreed to the monument only under the condition that the project would generate a grant program to go towards mentorship initiatives for children. Not only that, but the monument, he wanted it to reflect something other than his sort of previous life on the court. He wanted it to reflect more of his later life. So it would reflect him not just as the athlete, but also the player and coach, national mentorship leader, human rights and civil rights activist. And it really speaks to all those different dimensions of who he is. I have to say, as a sports commemorative monument, it's one of my favorite I've ever seen, because it really does what we suggest, what we suggested interpreting sports, and what our book is asking the public historians to do, which is to bring balance, to look at the whole humanity of an athlete and get them down from the pedestal, make them relatable and human, and let them be complex, because humans are complex. And this statue really does that. If you're ever in Boston, go to Government Center and check it out. It's really a testament to what can be done if we get beyond simply casting something in bronze or stone and setting it there without any verbiage or understanding of who that person was or the impact that they made. That practice sort of keeps them on a pedestal and keeps them out of reach, even of their biggest fans. It makes them unrelatable. And Russell sort of inherently knew that and has given us this. He partnered with Ann Hirsch, a Somerville resident who was the sculptor. We've got 2 children also in the sculpture. There's him and 2 children and pillars that reflect his life and his work and his impact and his values. It's really a beautiful testament. So what we've still got is a huge gap. There are a lot of athletes not being represented. For what it's worth, we have a nice selection. I don't know how this compares to other cities, if there are other cities that have as many commemorations of Black athletes from this era or just in general as Boston does. We have enough that I've put together a sports walking tour, because there's enough places to go see and check out, so that's really exciting. But there is still a huge gap in the impact that these players had and their public presence in our city. There's literally nothing for football at all, not even just Black athletes, but really at all, and lots of other gaps. So that's kind of where we sit today, but I really give a lot of credit to both of Bob and Doug for doing all this research and the work, and also those who have made commemorative efforts in Boston. I know Plays in Place has written a play about Kitty Knox that they plan to release, I believe, next year. And they are currently doing a bicycle tour once a year in her honor as well. So really getting people physically into the sport, which is one of the other things I love to see happen. Let people embody what those athletes embodied, take them to some of the same places, some sort of relive it. And they also have the play happening. So there's activity and movement around this. And I know these books are going to help promote and advocate for more of that. And thank you guys for allowing me to be a part of it.
Before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to highlight a couple of other slides. Jen, can you go to the Kitty Knox slide, which I think is... So that's Kitty Knox, who Catherine referenced. She was a biracial bicycle rider from around, she passed away in 1900, but she was really the first great and important Black cyclist, female cyclist. She tried to get the League of American Wheelmen to sort of integrate for her. The next slide, please. Major Taylor. There is a Major Taylor Museum and a statue and a boulevard in Worcester. He was one of the first great Black champions in cycling at the turn of the century. And actually, not to... she just dropped off. But on the call was Sharon Freed, who runs the Major Taylor Museum in Worcester. If you haven't checked that out. And I think the very last slide, that's I'm sorry, the one before, Willie O'Ree, which has a rink named after him. In 1958, he integrated professional hockey with the Boston Bruins. So some of these individuals have been recognized, as Kathleen refers to, and also these are stories that are brought to life a little bit more in our volume. So I think with that, we've got about 10 to 15 minutes left. We'd just like to open it up for questions, discussions, anything people would like to sort of talk about.
Doug, this is
Yes.
Ed.
Yes.
Here in Pittsburgh, we have the Willie O'Ree Hockey Academy, which supports Black youth hockey.
Okay, excellent. Academy. I did not know that.
And the other thing I just wanted to point out, the Charles Thomas story, it
Yeah.
seems like a parallel to the Bobby Greer story. Bobby Greer was the sole Black player at the University of Pittsburgh in 1955. And when Pitt was scheduled to play Georgia Tech in the Sugar Bowl, the governor of Georgia, Marvin Griffin, threatened to cancel the game because Pitt was going to field a Black player.
Excellent. Thank you. Two very good stories. There is a book about I think Black athletes or race and sports in Pittsburgh by an Amherst College professor, Robert Hayabashi, I believe, has focused a little bit on Pittsburgh in his work for those that might be interested. Anything else? Any other
Can I
thoughts?
answer Steve's question out loud as opposed to in the chat? Or do you want to take it?
For the recording, can we also just repeat the question? Oh, thanks.
Sure, yeah. So Steve asked, beyond these commemorative recognitions of Black athletes, is enough being done to connect them with the societal issues of the times and their impact on them? I mean, my quick answer is going to be no. Some is being done. I mean, I think, for starters, the work of this book series is part of that work. And I know some of the universities are doing some work looking into this. I think Doug and Bob can speak to that a little bit more. As far as commemoration is concerned, I'm going to just go back to, I think the issue is we just don't have enough public spaces that are dedicated to this. And the public spaces we do have are still kind of finding their footing with public history methods. And so part of the work we're trying to do is kind of merge those two so we can get more contextualized sports exhibits out into the public space. That's where you're going to get those societal issues being talked about in exhibits and in programs. Otherwise, yeah, you're sort of, even if they're recognized, you kind of get blurbs, right? We get these like little statements that aren't doing enough to really help people understand, why did this matter so much? And so, some sort of larger presence or larger exhibit, whether it was temporary or permanent in the city somewhere, I think could really go a long way. But I also want to pitch this back to Doug and Bob for the work you guys are doing, and you're doing some programs and series that are getting it out in front of people as well. So
Yeah, so Bob and I helped organize a race, politics, and sports conference at Boston College last month. There was also a program this past weekend at the West End Museum on Kitty Knox and Major Taylor. So there is some programming. Obviously, I think we'd like more. Actually, I'd like to get to a comment that Cynthia Cowan has, and I'll read it. And Bob, this is probably more in your wheelhouse. So Newton, the city of Newton, is aware of the need to do a better job of commemorating the history of the West Newton colored giants. But I am confident we will see movement on that point, hopefully soon. And she referenced a Wicked Local .com story from 2012. So Bob, I don't know how much you sort of know about that team
Yeah,
and those efforts.
I'm familiar with the team, yeah, and wrote about them in the piece that I have in the book. Yeah, I think part of it is when you get off the professional angle and you hit the community angle, there are certain things that become more apparent. So, and I'll sort of say again this notion that the teams did represent a certain sort of style of play, a different style of play. So there was a good deal of cultural expression that was part of baseball. we tend to see it a lot in dance or music or theater, and sometimes we leave sort of sport or athletics out of that. And I think when you take a look at the teams that were playing in Boston, that type of performance identity really comes through, and that certainly comes through in Medford. Uh, yeah, but again, I'm fascinated by the way in which the communities sort of nurtured these teams. How they came out and supported them. How did they make their money? How did they keep it all together? And a lot of that has to do with the significance that the community placed in athletics and how the community supported it. So yeah, West Medford. I write a lot about, I think, or a little bit about West Medford and that team. But what comes to mind there is just the crucial role that team played in terms of providing a sense of identity for the community.
Does anybody else have any questions, thoughts, ideas, suggestions?
I'll add one more thing. Oh, sorry.
No, I
Somebody else
just
wants
wanted
to
to say
speak.
something real quick. It'll take 2 seconds. Doug and I realized right away that this needed to be broader than just publications, and we are actively working with at least one university and a number of other universities to do exactly what the previous question asked, and that is to link the past to the present and to try to find lessons in the past that can inform sort of the present, and also to get a sort of dialogue going. And that's one of the ways that I think, in the beginning we thought of it just as a publication, but now we realize that it has to have more connection to the present day community, and some of the universities have been able to help us with that.
I just wanted to add that in order to get more of this in the public eye, we have needed and will continue to need a shift in social awareness and consciousness about where sports lies in our culture. It's sort of been this escapism space, and our research has revealed that there are some real political reasons for that it isn't just as simple as, well, sports is just fun and it's play. It's that we've, as a culture, sort of went and lived in that space in order to escape the impact that it's had in other ways, or how it reveals the culture, both as a lens and as a driver. The center of that conversation is shifting. And that's why all of this has been able to happen. That's why we've seen changes in native mascots, or the elimination of them, some of them anyway. And so, and yeah, and so I think that it's time and it will continue to happen, but we have to really continue to work at it. And the sports interpretation field is gonna, is gonna need to continue going under a lot of changes and shifts in order to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think our project in some ways was a response to this sort of, shut up and dribble mentality that we have currently, out of Washington and politically. There's a real concerted effort, I think, to muzzle sports and the potential of what sports can do in terms of social change. And I think what Doug and I tried to do is simply to remind people that sports has always been and always will be a way in which you can change people's minds or change society. It's not shut up and dribble. It never was shut up and dribble, and it never will be shut up and dribble.
Yeah, it never was. Yeah, that's a great statement, Bob. And the one other thing I'll add to that is that inclusivity does not mean also ran. It means allowing the people that experienced this to give their voices to what it was like, what it's like now, and to bring their own sense of self and culture into the conversation, not just to mention that they happen to also play and we've now included them in the narrative. It's doing a lot more of what you guys are doing, which is really bringing their stories and what mattered to them and their values to the forefront.
So I think we're coming up on our hour, and I wanted to thank Ed, Catherine, and Bob for their contributions. Um, Jen, I don't know if you had any final concluding thoughts or anything from NEMA's perspective, but obviously thank you very much for hosting and for going through the PowerPoint. And
Our pleasure. Thank you, Doug, for pulling this together and for bringing the idea to NEMA. It's always wonderful to have these conversations and to take a look at our local history through you get a different lens. It's valuable. Thank you. And thank you to Bob, Ed, and to Catherine Leanne for all of your work too.
great. I guess that's it. All right. Well, thank you. And
Thank you.
if there's any questions,
Thanks,
feel free to
everybody.
reach out. We would be glad to further the conversation.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks so much for
everybody.
your time today.